When I was in college during my senior year, I lived in a house with two roommates. They were my friends Sophia and Sarah. We had all known each other since freshman year, and our house was just off of campus. It was in a neighborhood that had many other houses. Some were college students, but many were not. The house that we lived in had 2 floors, and all our bedrooms were on the second floor. The main floor was the living room, kitchen, dining room, and a bathroom. One night, I found myself at home by myself at maybe 9 p.m. or so. My roommates were both gone, and one of them was at her school job, and the other was studying, I believe, at one of the buildings on campus. I was just sitting in the living room and doing some homework while watching TV. The night was going pretty good. Then I heard someone trying to open the front door, which was locked. The living room was at the front of the house, so it was not that far away from me. However, all the windows were covered, so I couldn't see right away. But I was not really that nervous, because I instantly assumed that it was one of my roommates arriving back home. I fully expected her to then put her key in and unlock the door, but the knob rattled again, and then I did not hear anything like a key. I still thought it was one of my roommates, and I got up to walk over to the door thinking that maybe she had forgot her key. We were in college, and with all 3 of us living in a house and having classes and work at all times, we were always coming and going. When I got over to the door, I moved the blinds and checked out the windows before opening it. And when I did not see one of my roommates, but instead saw a random man who I did not recognize. His back was turned to me, so I didn't see his face or anything as he was walking away. But he did not go back down the driveway. Instead, he was walking around the house, like he was either going to go next door or go into the backyard. And quickly, he was out of my sight. But this suddenly made me very nervous. I had a bad feeling about this, and I realized that the back door to the house might not be locked. So I quickly sprinted through the house over there, and sure enough, it wasn't locked. Without hesitating, I locked the door and then moved away from it. The windows were also covered there, so I couldn't see out. But no more than 30 seconds after I locked it, I heard the man trying to open that door too. Now I was really freaking out. The only thing I could think to do in that moment was to run upstairs. I'm not sure why that was my reaction, but I guess that it felt safer to get as far away from there as I could. So I ran up to my bedroom, which was at the back of the house and on the second floor. That gave me a view of the backyard from my window and the area of where the man was. I moved my shades and looked out of the window. The man was still there, standing kind of by the back door and looking around. For some reason, being up there gave me some confidence. I now felt a little better about things, so I decided to tell the guy to leave. I opened up my window, and when I did, he looked up at me. We were now looking at each other, and I yelled at the guy to leave or I was going to call the cops. The man didn't really react. He didn't leave, and he didn't say anything. He just kept standing there and looking up at me. This really freaked me out, so I decided to call the police. I closed my window and then dialed 911 on my cell phone. I told them someone was trying to get into my house, and I was told that an officer would be on the way. I looked back to the window again though, and now the man was gone. I wasn't sure where he went or if he left, or just went to another part of the house. But when the police arrived, he was completely gone. I called my roommates about it too. We were all really concerned that the man would come back. For like a week we were paranoid, and we were always looking out the windows and stuff. However, the guy never returned, which I'm really glad for. The thing that creeps me out the most about the whole thing was his reaction. When I opened the window, he just calmly looked up and stared at me. I would think that most criminals would run off at that point, but this guy had hardly any reaction. I live alone in my apartment, which I have had for several years. Not long ago, something creepy happened. I was at home by myself, and it was nighttime. Out of nowhere, I heard several really loud noises coming from above me. I live on the 3rd floor, and there are 4 floors in the building, so this had to be coming from my upstairs neighbor. But prior to that, I never remember hearing any loud noises coming from upstairs or anything along those lines. And these noises were super loud. It was like whoever was up there was jumping up and down and stomping on the floor as hard as they possibly could. I was confused. These noises went on for maybe 30 seconds or so, on and off. I didn't know why that would be happening, but when it stopped, I figured that it was just a one-time thing. However, that was not the only loud noise I heard that night, because roughly 10 minutes or so after the loud noises from upstairs, I heard a few very loud bangs on my apartment front door. but it was not quite a knock, more of a banging. It was like someone was hitting the door with the side of their fist rather than the knuckle so they could hit it harder. But whatever they were doing, they were going at it with about the same amount of force as the upstairs stomping. So right away I thought to myself, is this the same person? I didn't know what the meaning of it was. I got up to walk to the door, but the banging on it didn't last long, and had stopped by the time I was halfway there. When I looked out the peephole, there was no one. I opened the door and looked around in the hallway and still saw no one, but I was curious as to what was going on. I thought to myself I had somehow made my neighbor angry. Maybe this was their revenge. But I didn't have any loud music or loud TV. I hadn't had people over or been loud in any way. I really could not think of a reason for it. I decided to investigate though. So I went upstairs and I located the apartment that was right directly above mine, which I was able to confirm. Then I knocked on the door. I could ask whoever lived there if they had knocked on my door and why. After knocking, there was no answer though, so I knocked again. This time I heard movement inside the apartment. I was nervous, and about 10 or 20 seconds later, the door opened. A woman stood there and she asked me what I wanted. She was like rubbing her eyes and yawning like she was really tired. I asked her if she had just knocked on my door and asked if she had stomped on the floor as well. She said no and claimed that she was sleeping and I had just woken her up. Now, mind you, this was probably like 5 minutes after the noises, so I knew that she had to be lying. I asked if anybody else lived in that apartment and she said no, but then she said that was none of my business. I told her again that I was sure the noises came from her apartment, and she said no, I was mistaken, and then she shut the door in my face. I went back to my apartment, now suspicious and also confused. I didn't believe the woman. I knew the sound came from her apartment, but I had never even seen her before and didn't know why she would do that. I went back to my apartment then. There were no more strange noises that night or anything. I double-checked again to make sure that that apartment was directly above mine, and I was right. I tried to just move on and forget it at that point. As long as nothing like that happened again, it would be fine. But that wasn't the end of things. It was probably a week or so after the first incident. It was nighttime once more, and I was at home. My apartment was at the front of the building. It overlooked the parking lot and drive that went to another road as well as some grass. I suddenly heard the sound of something hitting my window. This was the window that was sliding glass and had my balcony on the other side. It was completely covered, and so I looked over but obviously couldn't see anything. Before I knew it, something else hit it. I wasn't quite sure what it was, so I went over and opened the blinds. When I did, I saw nothing. But then I saw what looked like a rock come flying up and hit my window. From where I was, the balcony blocked the view of the ground directly below. I got even closer and looked, and just barely saw what looked like the woman that lived above me. She was down outside the apartment building, and she quickly moved forward so that she was now out of my sight. No more rocks came flying towards me, so I opened the door and went out onto the balcony, but the woman had gone in the building, it seemed, because she was now gone. I yelled, asking who did that, but got no answer. And I noticed that a couple of small rocks were actually on my balcony. Thankfully, there was no damage to the window. I could not believe it. What was this woman's problem with me? Then, one other time, just a few days after this, I heard a few more random stomps coming from upstairs, and they were really loud. It was late at night once again, but I didn't bother to go upstairs and confront her. I was confused and wondering why I was getting this bad treatment from the neighbor upstairs. But then, about a week after the rock-throwing incident, and this was now a couple of months ago, I heard noises outside. It sounded like people arguing. I looked out the window and saw that same woman. She was walking out holding boxes and stuff and bringing it to her car. There was a cop there and someone who worked at the apartment. She was yelling at them, but it also looked like she was moving her stuff out of the apartment. I came to the conclusion that she had been evicted. The cops just seemed to be making sure that she was actually leaving. After like an hour of hearing her on and off loudly complaining as she went back and forth to her car, she drove away. I haven't seen her since, as she obviously no longer lives here. I still don't know why she got evicted or what her problem with me was. After she was gone, I reported the rock-throwing incident. I didn't at the time because I figured it would just lead to an argument, as I didn't have proof that it was her though, and I just saw her down there. She probably would have then come after me even worse, but I'm glad she's gone now. It's still just a mystery to me of why. I want to share a creepy thing that happened a few years ago. I still don't quite know what happened or how to explain it. But basically, I live alone and I have a smaller house a little bit out in the country. That's how I'm able to afford it, because it's pretty far out and not in a very populated area. There's more land here, although my yard is not very big. But the places around here are a little bit cheaper and it's very quiet. The street really only gets traffic of people who live here. The properties are also kind of far apart from each other and it's peaceful. So one night there was a guy walking down our street that I didn't recognize. I just happened to notice him. It was later at night and he just walked by my house down the street. It seemed slightly odd, but I didn't pay it that much attention. It was just something that I happened to notice. I was just walking past the window and saw it. As I was in my living room though, I noticed something out the window out of the corner of my eye about 20 minutes later. It was the guy walking back down the street again, the same guy. He walked past in the other direction and then was out of sight. For the rest of that night, I didn't see him or anything. I bring this up because the very next night I saw him again. I noticed him walking down the same way as before, and then like 10 minutes later, I saw him again. It was kind of suspicious to me though, because like I said, it's a very quiet neighborhood in almost the middle of nowhere. There were no sidewalks, and not really a reason to come to this neighborhood if you didn't live here. And I didn't recognize this guy at all, and I knew all the people who lived around me. So this was strange. And also, the way the guy walked didn't seem like someone who was just out for a walk or getting exercise. It was almost like he was looking around, and it just gave me a bad feeling. And when you combine that with the fact that it was like 10 o'clock at night, it certainly seemed strange. Still, I wasn't going to call the cops or anything. I'm sure there could be a number of actually logical explanations, and just walking down the street is not a crime at all. But it was something to keep my eye on. So I glanced over to the window more than usual the rest of the night, and I saw him again maybe a half hour later. Once more, he just walked by. It was strange. I didn't see him for the final hour or so that I was awake. Then I went to bed. Now, my house is just one level, and my bedroom is at the back of the house at one corner. I went to sleep that night, but I awoke randomly in the night. I just remember that I groggily woke up and turned over to go back to sleep. Before I closed my eyes though, I was facing my bedroom window and looking towards it. It looked out to the backyard, and things were normal. But then, seconds later, I saw someone come into view. It was that same guy. He walked past the window and was maybe 10 or 20 feet away from it, in my backyard. He didn't look over, and just continued walking and was quickly out of sight. I saw him for a total of maybe 5 seconds, but I know it was him. When I did, I was extremely confused and also creeped out. I laid there for like 10 seconds trying to make sense of it before I got up. It didn't help that I had just woken up. By the time I got over to the window, he was gone and out of my sight completely. I went around to every window in the house and looked, but did not see him. He was gone. So then I went back to bed. After that, I never saw him again. I still don't know what happened there. Who was that guy, and why did he walk through my yard at night? I'm certain that I was awake and not dreaming it. It's just a really weird thing though. Back when I was a kid, I would sometimes be left home alone, but not often. One time though, I was about 10 or 12, and my parents and brother were gone, so I was left home by myself. It was the evening time, and my friend who lived a couple of blocks away asked me to hang out. I told him that I could come over, but technically I was not supposed to because my parents were gone. But we agreed that it was not a big deal as long as I was home before they did. So I didn't tell my parents and I decided to go there. My friend had really cool video games that I didn't have, so that was a large factor in me going over there. The only problem was that I did not have a key to the house. But I figured it wouldn't be a big deal, because our neighborhood was pretty quiet, and nothing ever really seemed to happen. So I left the house, and I didn't bother to lock the front door, and then I walked to my friend's. I went over there and we played video games for a few hours. I knew that my parents and brother would probably arrive back home at around 9:30 or 10. So at about 8:45, I left my friend's house to go home. The walk home was fine. It took maybe 10 minutes. But when I got to our street and was approaching the house, I did notice one thing out of the norm. There was a single car parked on the side of the street across from the neighbor's kitty corner to us. It was a car and I didn't recognize it, and it struck me as odd because cars would rarely park on the side of our street there. I continued walking home and got to the house and then went inside. As soon as I started walking in the house though, I heard something. It was footsteps coming from out of view across in the other part of the house. Right away it gave me a bad feeling. But I pushed the bad feeling away and I thought that my parents must have gotten home without me realizing it. I was more so worried in that moment that I would get in trouble for being gone when they arrived back home. But then I went over to the window and looked out to the driveway. There were no cars in it, so they weren't home. And nobody said anything when I walked in the door. That gave me a terrible feeling. Someone else was in the house. For some reason, my first thought was to run and hide behind the couch in the corner of the room. I did that and then put a blanket over myself. Maybe 30 seconds later, though, I heard the back door to the house open and close. I stayed there and didn't move. Then, maybe 30 seconds after that, I heard a car door open and shut out front. This made me want to look because I wasn't sure if it was now my parents. I happened to be by the window, so I uncovered myself and glanced out. I then saw that car that had been parked across the street that I had noticed driving away. Some random person had been in the house. I didn't get a look at the driver with it being nighttime. I just saw the car driving away. I then got up and looked around the house to find that nobody was there. Nothing was stolen either, which was weird. I locked the doors and my parents got home a short time later. It was a terrifying experience and I'm just grateful that I'm okay. This is something that happened a few years ago. Sometimes I have to move around for my job. At this time in particular, I was working in a new city and got a smaller house to rent there. I would be living by myself, and the neighborhood was fairly busy with many other houses. They all had pretty small yards, but it was a decent place to live. It was close to the city and didn't seem dangerous or anything. I was enjoying it for the first couple of months. Then, one night, I arrived home from work pretty late. It was about 10 or 11 p.m., as sometimes I have to work later or longer shifts. When I arrived home, everything was normal and fine. The neighborhood was quiet and it seemed calm. So I drove into the driveway, parked my car, got out, and went inside. I was inside the house for no longer than a minute when there was a knock at my front door. Now this was really strange, obviously, because of how late it was at night. Plus, I had just gotten back home. So I walked over to the door and looked to see who was there. But I went to a window and looked out of that instead of just opening the door to see who was there. When I did, I saw a man who I did not recognize just standing there. He was wearing a hooded jacket, and I was pretty sure that he wasn't one of my neighbors. But even still, why knock on someone's door at this hour? I wasn't going to answer it. I moved away from the window and walked deeper into the house, hoping that he would just walk away and leave. The guy knocked again, though. I still did nothing. But then he knocked again for a third time. I hoped by now that he would think that nobody was home, or get the hint that nobody was going to answer. But with the fact that I had just recently arrived home, I wondered if he had seen me. Was this just a coincidence, or had he followed me, or had he been watching my house or something? Did he see me go inside? I didn't know why, but that's just a thought that came into my head for some reason. But I wasn't answering the door. Surprisingly, the guy just kept knocking. And he didn't knock any louder or faster. He just knocked the exact same way, over and over again. He would knock, wait like 30 seconds to a minute, and then knock again. After a long time of it, I was still in the other room, and I didn't know what to do. I could try to tell him to go away, but I didn't know if he was dangerous or something. Possibly there was an explanation, and nothing was wrong. It seemed like the longer I didn't answer, though, the more I could not, and the more it creeped me out, too. It wasn't like he was desperate for me to answer the door. It was more like he was just going to keep knocking for the longest time. After he was still knocking for like 15 minutes straight, I was completely creeped out. I even considered calling the cops, but I didn't think there was anything illegal about knocking on someone's door. Looking back now, I guess it could have been trespassing or something like that for him doing it such a long time with nobody answering. But in that moment, I didn't think of it. Still, I was debating it. After literally probably like 20 minutes of knocking on my door, it finally stopped. After he didn't knock for a couple minutes, I went over and looked out of the window, and he was now gone. And also, I noticed no car nearby, so I didn't know where he had come from. I stayed up a while longer and checked out of all the windows and stuff and didn't see him. Soon after, I went to bed. Now, that night, I was awoken at 2 o'clock in the morning. When I woke up, the first thing I heard was someone knocking at my front door. The guy was back, and he was knocking at my door again. And he was knocking in the exact same way. He was just calmly knocking on it, waiting a bit, and then knocking again. I was so creeped out. But this knocking didn't last long. He was only there for about 5 minutes this time, and then stopped and left. I was pretty creeped out still, though. Thankfully, he did not come back that night, and I never saw him again. I don't live there anymore, but I still wonder what the story was there. I never saw him prior to that or after that. So was he a neighbor? I don't think so. Did he follow me home or watch me return home? Maybe, but I don't know. I still wonder what he would have said or what would have happened had I answered the door, but I'm also glad that I didn't.